All the roll and go, where am I to go? Meet Johnny, where am I to go? For I'm a young and a sailor lad, and where am I to go?
Okay. Hello, and welcome to Where Am I to Go podcast. Today we happen to be in Phoenix, Arizona with Mark, and we are at the Hall of Flame Museum, which is a firefighting museum. And Mark's going to take us through, describe some of the things that they have, tell us about the history of firefighting. And I am excited to be here, Mark. I've been to this museum a couple of times, and this place is just unbelievable with antique fire engines.
Apparatus, engines, whatever you want to call it. We got a little bit of everything here, Loren.
You do.
And we're very glad to have you here. And we're going to, show you around, and as much as possible, we'll paint word pictures of the beautiful stuff that we have here at the Hall of Flame.
And that's what we're going to do. But before we get started with the word pictures, when I called to set up this appointment, I was told that you guys had a YouTube channel that you had started with the pandemic and all of that kind of stuff.
We do.
And I did go hit that YouTube channel. What was it called? Is it called the Hall of Flame?
It's called the Hall of Flame Museum YouTube channel. And you can find, right now I think we're up to about 70 videos. We've kind of been trying to up our game on the social media and online presence here at the museum, and to be honest with you, Loren, we're kind of old school here. We're coming to all of this online stuff a little later than a lot of museums are, but we're trying to make up for lost time. We have our little Facebook page and our Twitter page and our Instagram page, and we're working on some of the other social media possibilities that there are. But the biggest project that we were closed for a couple of months because of the pandemic, and during that time, we were still here, we just weren't open to the public, and we decided, well, if people can't come into the museum, let's bring the museum to them. And we started to do, one of the things that we do here, as you may or may not know, is we do a lot of youth programs, and we do programs for little kids.
And that's kind of your forte. You're the director of education.
I am. I'm the curator of education, and one of the biggest parts of my job, or at least it was until the pandemic came along, was doing field trips and groups like that with usually little kids, small kids. Preschool, kindergarten, first and second grade has tended to be our wheelhouse here. And we try to teach a bit of fire safety education, and we try to do it in a fun way. And it's a little tough with the very little kids, but we try to teach a little bit of very basic firefighting history too, just about how it developed and stuff like that in a way that the kids can understand. But one of the ways that we've done this all these years is with story times. We do stories for kids that teach in a fun, entertaining, non-threatening, not too scary sort of way. I mean, we always say people should be scared of fire. Kids should be scared of fire. For that matter, adults should be scared of fire. Even firefighters, if they're smart, are scared of fire. So we do these story times, and a big part of my job, and probably my favorite part of my job, but that has, for the most part, dried up since this started, and it looks like it's going to be quite a while before it starts again. So what we decided to do was put some of the stories online, and we did. Me reading these stories, also my associate Claudia here, who can do stories both in English and Spanish.
Oh, wow.
Did some English and Spanish stories. And but in addition to that, we thought, well, why not put some of the tour material on for adults or for people of any age? And so we started to kind of like we're going to do today, just talk about and describe and give some context to some of the exhibits here. And it's really something that we've kind of taken to, and we've got a lot of videos going. We hope to make a lot more. And you can check them out online on the Hall of Flame Museum YouTube channel.
No, I didn't watch 70 of them, but I probably watched 5 or 6. I don't know.
You got to get on the case.
I don't know. But yeah, they were good. The thing that's nice about them is the ones that I watched were 5 to 10 minutes long, so they're not super long. And so they're not hard to keep the interest of maybe a kid
yeah.
or even myself.
We're hoping so, yeah. Even to your attention span, we're trying to appeal to.
And so it was really nice being able to see those. And like I said, I've been through this museum before, and I'm sure that on your 70 plus videos that you've got, you highlight different pieces and some of that.
All kinds of stuff. And I'm relieved to hear that you don't think they're too long, because sometimes I think they're too long. Sometimes I think I run my mouth way too long on those videos. But I'm glad if you were able to stick with them.
Oh, yeah. So anyway, let's get started here. We walk into the lobby, which is the gift shop,
right.
and then we come on into the main area here, or at least I would consider this the main area. What do you call it, Gallery 1?
This is Gallery 1, exactly correct. Now we have 4 big galleries, and then we have some small side galleries that are all full of stuff that's worth checking out. My favorite gallery happens to be this one.
Mine too.
19th century and earlier, hand and horse drawn. When I do a group guided tour, I have a tendency to get a little bogged down in this gallery because it's the one that I enjoy the most, but it's also, I think, the one that people know least about. The other galleries, and they're wonderful, don't get me wrong, I love the other galleries too. The other galleries have fire trucks. They're full of fire trucks. This one is full of stuff from right before fire trucks. And
I would consider this maybe more works of art than what I would necessarily fire trucks. It's really interesting to me when I go to different museums how much of the horse-drawn carriages and those types of things are so much more elaborate than anything that you see nowadays. I mean, you look at the old hearse that were horse-drawn, and those hearses are just elaborate with the woodwork and that kind of stuff. And when you walk into this gallery, the first thing you see is to your left, you see the hand pump stuff. Then you see the horse-drawn, still hand pump, and then you get into more of the steam operated, and then and the way that these things are decorated up, and the way that they were taken care of and painted, and just the presentation of them is just unbelievable.
Well, I certainly agree with you. Vehicles in general, and maybe even machines and things like that, and in general, it used to be, to my mind, much more aesthetically pleasing than most stuff like that is nowadays. That includes fire trucks, but really I'd say it extends to vehicles and such of any kind. But with firefighting, I think it's especially true. And there's a reason for that. If you boil it right down, firefighters are show-offs.
Okay.
That's just what it comes down to. Firefighters love to, they don't want to just get to the fire, they want to look good getting there, okay? And so there's always been this impulse to have this kind of beautiful, elegant, ornate, aesthetically pleasing stuff. And that's especially true, Loren, of American firefighters. Now, we have stuff here just right nearby here in Gallery 1. We have stuff from Great Britain, from France. We have a couple pieces from Japan. And they're nice-looking, handsome, well-made pieces, but they don't have that sort of elegant, theatrical flair that you find in the American pieces. And like a lot of things in American culture, that derives from competition. That is, if the guys at the station down the street or the guys in the next town over or whatever, if they had some big, beautiful, impressive piece of fire equipment, then these guys right away had to start raising money so that they could have an even more beautiful, even more elegant piece of fire equipment, because competition is a big part of that culture of firefighting, and it still is true to this day. It's not as out there as it was probably in those days, but you still have that element of kind of friendly competition. Back in the old days, it wasn't always so friendly. That comes up between firefighting companies, and it has to do with the fact that essentially at bottom they're show-offs, and there's, let's face it, there's a streak of vanity to a lot of firefighters. People who go into that line of work often do it because they want to be heroes. They want everybody to think they're awesome, and so that also manifests itself in the way they create this beautiful material to kind of show off. We have pieces, we're going to take a look at it here in just a little bit. One of the most popular pieces we have here at the museum is a parade carriage that had absolutely no firefighting function. It was strictly to be in parades and look beautiful.
And it does.
And it is very good at that job. And it's, but the kids always say, invariably, this looks like what Cinderella went to the ball in. And it does. And it's not by accident that it does. And so we'll talk about that when the time comes. But yeah, firefighters, and this is all still true, okay? And firefighters love parades. And a lot of this stuff is, designed to look beautiful in a parade. And that's I always tell the little kids, that's one of the reasons we should practice fire safety, is that, we don't want to be taking firefighters away from their true profession of getting ready for parades, to go have to fight a fire or something. So why don't we get it started, though? Why don't we step over this way?
Okay. Now, we're going to go on down the aisle here that has a bunch of the old hand pump, hand-operated pieces.
That is correct.
These are not really big, so they must have been drawn by hand.
Yes, almost everything in this, people often think that this stuff is horse-drawn. Until you get to the big ladder wagons and the big steamers, mostly in the later part of the 1800s, most of these pieces, there's a few exceptions, but most of these pieces were drawn by hand. They're built to be fairly lightweight, and the guys just pulled them down the road by hand. And part of that is because, part of it is because a dedicated horse team for a fire situation, that's an expensive proposition. And it's expensive because you have to train fire horses. It's kind of like a war horse.
Right.
Fire is not a comfortable environment for a horse. People running around, yelling, all that. Horses are nervous animals. And so you have to train a horse for fire just like you would have to train a horse for any other kind of specialized work like that. But also, horses are expensive anyway, but in a small town, a village, a rural community, you might use your fire department half dozen times a year. So to have a dedicated horse team just for that is not economically feasible. It wasn't until kind of the Industrial Revolution and the particular need to have smaller fire crews in big cities that you had fire horses. Prior to that, stuff was because the stuff got so heavy, you had to have horses for that. This stuff, though, like you said, it's fairly small, it's fairly lightweight, and the big crews would just pull it by hand. Now, what we're standing in front of here, it's number 10 in our collection, but it's the oldest large piece in our collection. It's from 1725. So I always tell the little kids, this is from 7 years before George Washington was born. This one was built in England, and this one also did service in England. It was in the north of England. It was privately owned. It was owned by an estate, and it was made in London by a company called Newsham. And Richard Newsham owned this company, and he made these that were sold throughout Great Britain, but also they were sold in colonial America. They were sold on the continent. Peter the Great bought a bunch of these for Imperial Russia. And this one, like I said, belonged to a private estate, but it probably also served the little village nearby this estate. And, just so that people can describe it, it's made of dark wood, and it has, at one end, it's got a big box-like tub.
Now, when you're talking big box, I like to kind of describe dimensions a little bit.
Please do.
This thing's probably 2 foot wide. It's probably a total of 10 foot long.
Yes.
And it's got a pump handle on the side. It looks like you'd put, 4 firemen down the side to lift this pump up and down.
Exactly.
And to work the pump action. And then
it's got more if you wanted to.
And then it's got the air nozzle coming out. Now, did they store water in this also?
You might store water, or you might not, because there are problems with having standing water like that. But yeah, you'd probably show up with a full tub.
And a full tub's going to hold, I'm guessing, 60 gallons?
About 80 gallons.
About 80 gallons.
Yeah, and there's a hopper at one end, so that with this one, you still have the bucket brigade. Everybody's seen in the Western movies, the church is on fire and everybody's passing the buckets. Terrible way to fight a fire. That's why these were developed, because that's no way to fight a fire. But with this one, they didn't have good hose yet. Hose, we don't think about it, but fire hose was a tougher nut to crack than you would think. It's a tube that's flexible but watertight. That's not so easy to figure out. And in England particularly, they had really bad leather hose. So this was designed not to need a hose. You still had the bucket brigade. But instead of the last guy in line feebly trying to throw his bucket of water on the fire, the last guy in line here just pours his bucket of water into the hopper. The tub holds about 80 gallons, like you said, and yes, there is a handle here, and it connects to the handle on the other side, and you pump up and down.
So you got 4 guys on each side, ideally.
At least, exactly.
Okay, and
you
then
might also have there's a couple of brake pedals here that are hooked up, and you might have a couple of guys standing up here with their feet on these, doing a little Stairmaster action, give you a little extra oomph. You really get this thing going. It gets you about 60 gallons a minute output through this copper, nozzle here.
That means you need 60 buckets of water dropping into that hopper.
They got to really fly the bucket brigade, or this thing's going to run out of water in just a couple minutes.
But it's got a solid hose or solid, neck down. It's neck down.
Brass or copper
nozzle.
Yeah, they call it a branch pipe. The nozzle that sticks up. It's fixed, so you can't, it doesn't have all that flexibility, but you can get about 60 gallons of water. You can arc it through a front door or a porch window or something like that, so you don't have to get right up on top of the fire anymore. You can shoot it quite a few yards. And so it seems really primitive, but the truth is it was genius. It was a huge leap forward over the bucket brigades. And we think here at the museum that it's really kind of, you might say, one of the unsung heroes of the Industrial Revolution. It's one of the things that, for better or worse, enabled big metropolitan areas to grow. If you think about the great cities of the world in those days, New York and London and Paris and Shanghai and Tokyo, most of them probably weren't all that much bigger than downtown Tempe right down the road here, okay? Because they couldn't be. Every 10 years or so, a fifth or a quarter of your city would burn down.
The big Chicago fire that the cow kicked over the lamp.
And we're going to talk about that, believe me.
Okay.
Yeah, if you want to at least.
Oh, I'm into talking about anything that we're here to talk about.
We're going to talk about that. But this gave you a real chance at preventing it. Doesn't mean that big city fires didn't happen. They did.
Right.
Chicago fire being the most obvious example. But this really changed the world. And if you look around the first part of the museum, you see they get bigger, they get prettier, they get fancier, they get some bells and whistles to them. About 1820, they do develop good, flexible fire hose that's pretty viable. But it's the same basic idea. It's handles on either side and guys on either side pumping up and down. It looks kind of like what you think of like a railroad hand car,
right?
The way they pump up and down on all of these things. And so that's the first big state-of-the-art in firefighting technology are these hand pumpers. And if we step across the aisle here, we have...
Can I back up just a little tiny bit?
Sure.
Okay, I have heard in the past, and you can correct me if I'm right or wrong, that back in the day when...
I won't correct you if you're right.
Back in the day when these things were operating,
right,
that there was a big competition between the different fire departments. And the competition was based on pay. If you were the first one at the fire, you were able to get paid for putting out the fire. If you were the second team on duty or to show up, then
absolutely right. Yes.
Then you didn't get paid, but you still got to help fight the fire.
Right. Or maybe at most, at best you got paid, but not nearly as much.
And so the big competition between these firefighters and between these stations was they needed to have the fastest runners they could have.
Yep.
And they had to be the first ones there.
Yeah.
And
if you look at the back wall here, Loren, you'll see it's covered with insurance fire marks, and that's who was doing the paying, was the very early fire insurance industry. And that was where this money came from, and that was where this whole big deal of first water. If you got first water on the fire, then you were who got paid, or at any rate who got paid the most. And so, we'll absolutely talk about that. And it did lead to very, very real problems. And it was part of why there was a lot of incentive to develop a technology that went beyond these hand pumpers. Because you can imagine, if you're fighting to get paid, it leads to all kinds of problems, brawls and all kinds of nasty stuff. And like this would be an example. This one that we're standing in front of, like I said, this is probably my favorite piece in the whole museum. I love this piece. This one is a hand pumper, and it was built in 1844 in the city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It's American, and it was built for the city of Pawtucket, Rhode Island. It was a volunteer brigade there called the Pawtucket Veterans. And it's big and beautiful and elegant, and the hand pumpers, I think it's the most beautiful one we have. But it's also powerful. It's also a real good piece of firefighting technology. Now on either side, you'll notice these kind of V-shaped wooden things here, right?
Okay, let me do a little descriptive here.
Please do.
Okay, we've got wheels on this one. Now the first one that we were talking about had like probably 15-inch wheels. They're very, very small. I would imagine that going down a cobblestone road would be extremely rough.
Best, yeah.
This one here has wheels that are probably 48 inches, 40 inches.
I guess.
They're big wheels like what you'd find on an old wagon that was horse-drawn. This box on this is probably twice as big as what the other one is. I'm guessing this one holds 140, 160 gallons.
Right.
And it's got a little thing in the middle, a box that comes up out of the
what
tank
they call
box.
the condenser box. By this time, it was mostly decorative, but you could load water into it from the top.
From the top with the bucket brigade.
Yeah, now you wouldn't.
Now
do
the
that
bucket
normally.
brigade's going to have to be pretty dang tall to figure out how to get the water in there, because that's up 7 foot tall.
You wouldn't load it from there during a fire. You would load it there prior to a fire, because this one hooks up to a hydrant, believe it or not.
Okay, and so they had hydrants at this point
By
in time.
this point, yeah.
And
Now,
then what
look
year
we
were you
think of.
saying?
This is 1844.
Okay.
And this is probably about as good as the hand pumpers ever got, okay? And what happened was, and you'll also notice that condenser box is beautifully decorated with murals. Now, it's the V-shaped wooden things there, those are the pump handles. They are folded up now. This is how it would have sat in the fire station or while you're pulling it through the streets.
And when you're talking about these V's, you've got a piece of metal that comes on down for two pump handles. It's probably 15 foot long. And then these V's are the handles that I'm assuming that they used to pump with, but they fold up and they set against the metal apparatus.
Right.
And then when you unfold it, you end up with two handles, and these handles are, I'll bet these handles are 8-10 foot long.
Yeah, that looks right.
And two of them fold down towards the tank, and the other two stick up to where I bet they're 12 foot above ground level.
Right, yeah, these 4 sets of 2 wooden arms each. And what you would do is fold them down, and they would lay out horizontally. They'd drop into this bracket.
They'd lock into a bracket and then sit
it up.
Okay.
And and so it would all lay out horizontally. And these platforms would also lay out horizontally.
Okay, and now he's folding a platform out that's a board that's probably 10 inches wide, and it folded out another 3.5 feet.
Right.
And these must be to stand on.
Exactly. There's probably 12 guys stand up here.
12 guys across this board.
Across the board.
And the total length of this board's only going to be about 12 feet or 13 feet.
That,
so shoulder to shoulder, or maybe even worse.
Oh yeah, very tight. Now, even allowing for the fact that people were smaller in those days.
And I'm assuming 6 are standing looking forward and 6 are standing looking back.
Right. Well,
because there's 2 sets of handles on each side.
They're working this set of handles up here.
Right.
Okay? And then there's another 13 guys that work that set of handles down on the ground, the forward set of handles down on the ground.
Okay, so we got 25 guys that are working just this one side.
25 guys.
And we have another 25 on the back side of this.
Exactly. So
holy smokes, you got a 50-man crew.
A 50-man crew, and here is the action on it. Okay?
Oh,
so we're
wow.
moving the whole pump apparatus up and down. You have to imagine the handles folded down. But this is how it went up and down.
And now, do you have pictures of this on your videos on
YouTube?
We do.
We have a whole segment just on this.
This is something that you definitely need to go take a look at, see, because this is just way cool.
Now, I can move this.
Linda has a question.
Yes, Linda.
It looks like it's a horse-drawn vehicle.
It's not, though.
Okay.
This was, I mean, it actually, you'll see there's a harness down under there.
Yeah.
That was drawn, after this was in active service, it was still used in competitions after it was retired. They developed that harness so that it could be pulled by one horse, and the guy would also ride the horse, lucky horse, huh? And, but in practice, this was pulled, you got a crew. Now, here's the thing. After 15, 20 minutes of these guys pumping up and down, what happens?
Well, they run out of water.
Not necessarily.
But they're getting definitely tired.
They get very tired, and they can barely lift their arms over their head. Right. So ideally, you needed a second crew of, give or take, about 50 guys to run this for another 15, 20 minutes. So to run this thing for any length of time, you needed about 100 guys for one piece of equipment. But that's a big crew that allows you to pull this thing through the streets by hand.
I was going to say, you're talking over 1,000 pounds that this thing's going to weigh when you've got water in it. Plus,
with water in it,
and the carriage itself weighs what? Probably, probably another 400.
Probably, yeah, probably does. I don't really know, to be honest, what the weight on this is, but it's, and you're talking about, steel tires, stuff like that. Now, so as I said, these guys are pumping. On the other side from where we're standing is a place that hooks up a hose, the draft hose, which goes to probably a portable wooden fire hydrant that you bring with you. So you dig down till you hit that wooden water main, you auger open, you bust open the water main, you screw in your portable hydrant, hook it up, and then here is your play hose, which is what you point at the fire.
Now, just a second. Let's back up here for a second.
Okay.
You're talking, these guys show up, they've got to dig down 3.5, 4 feet.
Probably.
Till they find a water main.
Yeah, and they have a schematic.
And the water mains were made out of wood at that time.
Exactly.
With a metal band around it, so they were wood tubes. Mm-hmm. And then they had an auger that they augered through the water main. Now, did the pressure from the water main operate the hydrant?
Yeah, that water was under pressure, so it wasn't like modern pressure. Of course.
So how did they keep that hydrant shoved down into the wood?
It would screw in.
It would screw in afterwards.
Exactly.
So they had an auger with a tap on it, basically.
Right. This is the beginning, you understand. Later, the city planners and so forth started building what they called standpipes into the water mains, so that you would just show up and hook it up like we do today. But originally, they would carry these standpipes with them. Okay.
This is just, I never even imagined something like this. So as
very,
soon as you drill the auger,
laborious.
now does the auger on the bottom of the hydrant, or do they drill the auger with a separate tool and then you end up with a gusher coming out?
I believe in most, it could have been different in different cases. I believe in most cases it was a separate tool.
So you're standing there with water shooting 50 feet in the air because of pressure, trying
like
to
capping off an oil gusher.
Well, I'm thinking more like capping off Old Faithful.
Well, that's what it pretty much amounted to. Now, I don't know that the pressure was that high. The water was under pressure, but it may not have been just so that it was just gone a gusher when they busted it open.
But still, you're showing up in, let's say, Pennsylvania someplace, or Wyoming, and it's 20 degrees outside,
exactly.
And you've got this gusher water coming up, and you're trying to figure out how to plug a hole before you can come over here and start pumping.
It is. It's a lot to think about. Now, you've heard of, people of our age at least, have probably heard of fire hydrants referred to as fire plugs.
Yes.
I don't know that they commonly are still, but that comes from after you pump the water and you fought the fire. You take out the fire hydrant and you take a big old 1-inch diameter plug and you pound it in and you plug the main that you broke open. Then you bury it, but maybe you mark it with like a steel spike or something like that, a metal spike or something, so that if you ever have to come back to the same place, pull the spike, dig down, right where to dig, you pull that plug and you got water real quick. And that gives you that first water, right? Now, the story is that, and somebody told me this who came in on one of the tours, I don't know if it's true, but it's a good story anyway, that it used to be that because they wanted to get that first water, one of the first things you do is maybe send like a kid down there to hide that main with like a pickle barrel or a crate or something like that. And if another crew showed up first, another volunteer brigade showed up first, and they got wise and they pushed the kid aside and took it, they eventually started sending like the biggest, meanest, ugliest looking SOB that they had down there carrying an axe or a crowbar or something like that, and he would guard it. And supposedly, according to this guy, that became known as the plug ugly, and that is the origin of the term plug ugly. I don't know, but I like the story.
It is a good story.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can see how, there again, I mean, there's big money if you show up first and get that first
That's
water.
Exactly right.
It'd be worth your time.
The result of that was sometimes pretty bad violence between these guys. And that's because in the big cities, not so much in the smaller towns and the rural areas, but in the big cities where there were a whole bunch of these different volunteer brigades, what they often really amounted to, when you came right down to it, was street gangs.
Right.
They tended to break down along racial or ethnic or religious lines. They fought for turf. They had, political influence. They would make alliances between themselves. You've heard of Boss Tweed, William Tweed,
Right.
the famous political machine in New York City in the 1800s. William Tweed started he eventually became the head of Tammany Hall, which was this kind of social club that had enormous political influence and became, after a certain amount of time, a kind of a shadow government in New York. But it eventually got to where he started out as a New York City firefighter, and he was known to be a really nasty fellow with an axe in a brawl. And so that route, the local governments got really tired. There were versions of this in other cities as well.
Oh, I'm sure.
And, the local governments got really tired of these guys, essentially gangs. And sometimes you might have a fire brigade, a volunteer brigade, that had, let's say, 250 members, of which maybe 75 or 100 actually went to fires, because the others were just kind of parasites. They were political hangers-on. There were big advantages in many places to being a firefighter. You were just kind of plugged in politically in the local government in a lot of cases, for one thing. For another thing, in many areas, you got a break on your taxes. In many cases, you were exempt from the draft. In many cases, you were exempt from jury duty. So a lot of these guys wanted to be on a fire department, whether they actually showed up or not. So there was all this political parasitism and corruption that happened, and it was just a problem. It was getting bad. And in a minute, when we finish up with this, we'll tell you about what really started the professional fire service in the U.S. But you see, the problem was starting it at this point. 100 guys to run one piece of equipment. You need these big crews. You can't put all those guys on the city payroll. So
were most of these volunteer fire
they
departments?
were all volunteer. Theoretically, there were still ways to make money from it, but it was all volunteer in the United States in the 19th century. Cincinnati, Ohio, is where the professional fire service was born in this country, and we'll talk about why in a minute. But I want to finish up real quick about this.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Rabbit holes. Keep going.
I get it. And that's the thing about when you talk about this stuff, there's all these different rabbit holes you can go down. It's absolutely true. But the thing that I love about this piece, in addition to it just being big and cool, is it's beautiful. It's covered with these paintings. The one we're facing now, we believe, is supposed to be Rebecca at the well from the Old Testament. On the one side, there's an Indian sachem from what's now Massachusetts, a Pawtucket Indian sachem named King Philip. He's also on the Great Seal of the state of Massachusetts. There's the Great Seal of the state of Rhode Island on this side with the word hope.
Yep.
And on the other side is St. Euphemia in the Orthodox Catholic Church. She was a saint that, I don't know, I guess the Romans tried to throw her to the lions, and the lions liked her and didn't eat her, and so they threw her into the fiery furnace, as Romans were known to do, and supposedly she came out with, completely unscathed. So you can see why firefighters would like her.
Right.
So these paintings, when this came into the museum long before I was here, it was, as I understand it was just covered with white paint. And our restorer, a man, you can see his painting over on his portrait over on the wall there with the wagon wheel.
Okay.
His name was Don Hale, and he restored most of these pieces that you'll see today. You can find his signature on many of them, including this one.
Right.
Don painstakingly removed all that paint and lacquer, and he found these beautiful paintings under that.
Wow.
Under that white paint. I can never get my head, Loren, around the fact that at some point in this thing's history, somebody was just like, out of heck with this, and painted white paint over those murals. But what Don said was that it probably saved them. It kind of kept the elements off of them for all those decades. And so, but this is characteristic, again, particularly of American firefighting. American firefighters love to have this stuff, lavishly decorated. Now,
and when he's talking lavishly decorated, we've got panels here with real pretty wood. I'm not sure what that is. It's not oak. It looks like a teak or something.
It does, yeah.
And they've got a blue frame around it that's like 3/4 of an inch, and then the rest of the wagon is painted red with all kinds of pen striping and just little ornate things.
That, yeah, filigree.
And then you've got your tower here with the paintings that he was just describing. The pump apparatus handles are all painted white with Pawtucket written on it. You've got a solid brass Rhode Island #1 with brass rail around the top. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous piece, as all of these are.
I think this one, for me, this one kind of takes the cake in terms of the functional pieces, at least. But we have stuff here that you can see with, beautiful wood inlay designs and.
It's just amazing.
All those gorgeous kind of, swirling 19th century design styles. So it's very elegant to me.
And now as we're walking down this little thing, I want to tell people there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, just in this one aisle, 18 pieces that are all representative of things that we're talking about here. And we're going to bypass several of them. But they're all just absolutely beautiful works of art. It's not like what do I want to say here? It's not like just a functional piece. It's a functional work of art, is what it is.
And that was very much by design. You're exactly right. Now, what we're standing in front of here, if the one from Pawtucket that we were just talking about, if that's an example of what a bigger town or a city would have, this is an example of what a well-equipped small town or rural community might have. This one, can you guess where it's from, across the draft hose there?
It says Badger Fire Company.
So you're going to guess?
I don't know where Badger is.
No, it's not a town name. It's from Wisconsin.
Oh, okay.
So they love the Badgers up in Wisconsin.
Okay.
So this is from a little German farming town called Centerville, Wisconsin. And it was built in the 1860s by a company called Rumsey in St. Louis, Missouri. And it has, a kind of a small town feel to it. It's built to be space efficient. So you see the pump handles here fold in into the center. The draft hose with Badger Fire Company painted on it flips over the top. That's what they call a squirrel tail.
Okay.
And you'll notice that at the end of the squirrel tail there, at the end of the draft hose, there's a little sieve on the end of the hose.
Right.
That's because in a rural setting like that, you probably weren't drafting from a hydrant. You're probably drafting from a natural water source, from a pond.
Irrigation ditch.
Irrigation ditch, a creek, whatever. And so you didn't want fish and frogs and seaweed and stuff.
Now, does it have a foot valve in it also so that the water doesn't bleed back, or did you have to prime this every time?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
If it has a valve like that, I don't know where it is.
Well, usually, from my experience, just running pumps and irrigation or whatever, it sits at the very end of the hose.
Yeah, no.
And then you can get...
That being the case, I don't think so.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Loren, I'm more the social history guy. The technical stuff is not always in my...
That's okay.
Is not always in my wheelhouse, but I'm sure it's an interesting question. But what is, like I said, this was built in St. Louis. It's also quite beautiful. It's very beautifully decorated with a rose design at the end and some other sort of ornate, swirly things.
And kind of a neat olive green
little accent.
That's about 3/4 of an inch.
Right.
And like he was saying, this one here is quite a bit smaller than the last piece we were talking about. This one here holds probably, like 60, 80 gallons again?
Something like that, yes.
And it's a smaller unit, but the wheels are bigger, so it would have been easier to pull down the road.
And it's all built to be compact so that you don't need a dedicated space in a small town like that for your fire station. You just stick this in somebody's barn or something like that.
Right.
And if the big bell that you passed on the way in, that's also from Centerville. A couple of aisles over, there's a big yellow ladder wagon with some very obviously homemade ladders on it. That's also from Centerville, Wisconsin. So I'm guessing that we basically have their whole fire department here at the museum. But what's really special to us about this, aside from the fact that it's just a neat piece, is that this actual piece was used to fight something you mentioned earlier, the Great Chicago Fire.
Oh, really?
Yes, October of 1871 in the city of Chicago, started by...
Miss O'Leary.
Mrs. O'Leary's cow is what they say now.
Well, yeah, she didn't want to take blame for it.
Right. Well, what they're saying now, what historians now say is that probably was really, truly, genuinely fake news. That was invented by the newspapers there in Chicago, or was really just by one newspaper, probably to stir up anti-immigrant hatred against the Irish. In the decade or more prior to the Great Chicago Fire, there had been this huge influx, of population, and a big part of that had been Irish immigrants who just were looking for new prospects. And a lot of the earlier residents of Chicago, which had been sort of this small frontier town really up to that point, resented, as people often do, this influx of immigrants. And so anything to bash the Irish, right? So Mrs. O'Leary's cow ended up in the newspaper, supposedly didn't feel like getting milked one night, kicked over a kerosene lantern, and the barn on DeKoven Street there in Chicago went up. Mrs. O'Leary said, no, I was in bed, my cow had nothing to do with it. There are a lot of alternate theories as to how the fire started, but one of the most interesting that I've heard in recent years is that it may actually have been a meteor shower.
Oh, really?
A lot of people saw fireballs falling out of the sky, and there were wildfires. It had been a very dry year, 1871. There were terrible wildfires all over the upper Midwest. Actually, there's a fire that you may have heard of it. Most people have not, called the Peshtigo Fire.
I have not.
All right. Well, it was actually orders of magnitude worse than the Great Chicago Fire. Happened in rural Michigan, rural Wisconsin, and over the border into a bit of Michigan. Burned out of control, wiped out 9 little towns, killed over 1,000 people. In terms of fatality, it is the worst fire, not just in American history, but recorded in world history, other than fires that were started because of war.
Right.
You know, Hiroshima or Dresden or something like that obviously were worse. But in terms of a naturally occurring fire, that is said to be the worst. And it happened the same days, literally the same week in October of 1871 as the Great Chicago Fire. But, you know, almost everybody remembers, you know, Mrs. O'Leary's cow and the hot time and the old town tonight and all that stuff. Very few people remember the Peshtigo Fire. It's just one of those weird ways that history works. But the history of the Great Chicago Fire was a very significant fire. It burned almost a third of the city of Chicago. It did kill several hundred people, unfortunately, and it was a big tragedy, but it had an interesting effect, which is to say, when Chicago rebuilt, they were like, this isn't happening again. And so they enacted all kinds of building codes. Buildings had to be thus and such far apart, streets had to be thus such apart, and the whole town at the time of the Great Chicago Fire was pretty much made out of wood. Everything was close together, the buildings were made out of wood, even the sidewalks were made out of wood. It was extremely flammable. And so they changed all of that. Buildings had to be stone or brick, or a certain percentage stone or brick. Alleys had to be wider, streets had to be wider, the sidewalks had to be paved instead of made out of wood. And it was very successful. And other cities, as they grew, began adopting this plan. So Chicago was made a much bigger, much stronger city because of the Great Chicago Fire, tragic though it was. But not only that, other cities, when built along that line, were able to grow much more successfully because they had to kind of bite the bullet and enact these measures which they adopted. Not many people have heard about the Great Seattle Fire, which happened a little later and was a pretty bad fire. Only one person died in it, and even that, it's debatable. But it was again, Seattle was just kind of a small fishing town pretty much at that time. And they adopted the Chicago-style ordinances, and when they rebuilt, if you ever get up to the Museum of History and Industry in Seattle, I highly recommend you go in there. It's a really cool museum in general, but they have a terrific display that I really envy on the Great Seattle Fire. It's a really good one. But it was an example of the influence that the Chicago Fire had, that Seattle actually grew enormously, exponentially, because of the fire they had, and in part it was because of workmen who came in to rebuild, and were just kind of like, man, it's nice here, I'm going to stay here.
Right.
And so that actually resulted in a boom for the city as over the few years it took them to rebuild. So anyway, this is this one, the guys in this town loaded this onto a flat car, and they went down to Chicago, and they didn't get there till the 4th day, so it's hard to say how much was left to do. But supposedly they sprayed a little water on day 4 of the Great Chicago Fire.
Wow.
All right, so now let's skip ahead a little bit.
Okay, we're walking down through this aisle and looking at several other pieces here. This is, like I said, works of art that are just unbelievable.
Now you were talking about the water mains, right?
Right.
Well, now we're standing by a plexiglass display case, and we have some artifacts of early firefighting in it. But one of the pieces that we have is just simply a length of main plumbing from a city. And
now that just looks like a log that's
just a big old hollowed out log.
and then it's been beveled down on the edge and on the outside edge to where the pieces fit together.
Yeah, and still to this day, in one town or another, I know not too long ago they found a bunch of them in Washington, D.C. While they were digging out to remodel. They found a bunch of these pipes still just buried there.
So they just went on out, cut logs that were approximately what? Well, they probably had several different sizes, but this one here is 6 inch, 8 inch in diameter.
Like that, yeah.
And then they ran a 3 inch borehole through the middle.
Right, that's exactly it. And you can see they carved down a stem so they could put it into the next piece.
Yeah, they had one that was flared out wider on one side, and the other side stuck out.
It was very much more laborious than the iron pipes that came in later. But as I said, you'd dig down, you'd plug into this. Then when you were done, you'd plug it and leave it. But you always wanted to have it, ready if you need to come back to the same place, right? And as I said, this led to clashes and brawls, some of them quite violent. Well, one Saturday night in Cincinnati, Ohio, there was a fire at an empty factory, a woodworking factory, a planing mill. And 13 different fire companies showed up, and they didn't fight the fire, they fought each other. It was a terrible fight, brawl, went on for hours, turned into a gunfight. Several guys were killed, and nobody ever touched the burning factory. That factory and several other buildings nearby burned down to the ground, and nobody ever touched them. And the city fathers in Cincinnati were like, that's it, we've had enough of this, we're getting rid of these volunteer brigades, and we're going to start a professional fire service, which they'd wanted to do for a long time. In Cincinnati, there actually was the American Fire Engine Company, and they by that time were making steamers. And the steamers allowed, if you could afford one, and if you could afford the horses to pull it, the steamers allowed for professional fire crews, because you didn't need those big crews anymore. And so Cincinnati was the first to do it. Soon after, Chicago followed suit, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, D.C., Baltimore. New York and Boston were late to the party. It was 1865. It was after the Civil War, before New York went to a fully professional crew. And because they were real resistant to, because these guys were so connected and they didn't want to give up that civic power that they had. And so it was a big shock, though, to the civic system, because you would go from, in a town like New York, you'd go from having 6,000 to 7,000 firefighters, and in one day you had fewer than 1,000. Wow. And all these guys were just out in the cold. But within a few years, the citizens there saw that it was a much better, much more efficient kind of a system. So that was in the big cities. In the small towns, because they couldn't afford the steamers, they stuck with the hand pumpers, and they needed those big crews, so they stuck with a volunteer brigade. Truthfully, in some really rural places, probably including a lot of Arizona, they probably stuck with the bucket brigades.
Wow!
But for a long time, that remains true. Okay, in big cities and larger towns, you have, to this day, you have professional fire services. But if you get out to like where I come from in Pennsylvania, my little hometown, firefighting is still done by volunteers.
Our towns too. Almost all the towns. They may have a couple of people that work at the fire station in some of the bigger cities around there.
You might have a paid chief, maybe a paid driver.
But when that fire alarm goes off, you see guys coming from their job or from their house or out of town or whatever, and they're all racing on in. They've all got their lights on their truck,
almost 75%.
So they can speed a little bit.
Exactly.
And you're not going to get your job done today if there's a fire, because your plumber's gonna be there at the fire.
Almost 75% of the firefighters in the United States to this day are volunteer firefighters.
Wow.
So now, the next thing I want to show you, hang on 1 second, because I want to kind of cut off the little bit of a noise distraction here. But we're going to head up this aisle, and I want you to check out these 3 carriages, which are probably among the prettiest things that we have in the museum. And we're going to stop at the one at the end. at the far end and talk about it.
Okay, before we get there,
Okay.
you were talking about the primitive ladder trucks.
Yeah.
And these ladders are made out of tree poles that
Local
are
poles, yeah.
What are they? 30 foot long?
Sure.
And they're pulled on a wagon that's 25 foot long
Right.
with big wheels. Again, hand pulled.
Lined with brigade buckets.
And it's lined with brigade buckets. And now these buckets are all leather, aren't they?
Right, exactly. And they so even if you had a pumper, this one's from Centerville, Wisconsin, like we're the same place where, you still might have these buckets so that you can start attacking the fire even until you get everything hooked up, or if it's far away from a water source. So
And you got 14 buckets on each side, so you can have 28 guys in your bucket brigade running back and forth.
Well, this is clearly a homemade job. Some local guy was given the job of building these ladders, and they're hooked at one end. And, so it's, as you can see, now when you started getting ladders, big ladder wagons like this, Centerville's a really small town, but in big cities, they needed these because buildings were starting to get taller.
Right.
And you need to go up and get people out. And ladders are really heavy.
Right.
Really heavy. So this one could be hand or horse drawn, but when you start to get those big, sophisticated ladder wagons, that along with the steamers was one of the things that made you require horses.
And then they also had pipe wagons too, right? Where they would take hose that were 15 foot long lengths, and they had those stacked on the sides.
If you come from a smaller town, you may remember something will be called a hook and ladder company, or something will be called a hose company, or something will be called an engine company. That is, that goes back to those days when one company just brought hose. They bring. This is a ceremonial one.
Right.
That one is not, for instance. That actually carries a hose on a reel. They just bring the hose. Another company would just bring the ladders. Another company would just bring the pumper. You know, and it was eventually the fire truck that combined all of those functions.
And something else I saw over here too that I wanted to bring up was everybody's familiar with the bright red helmets or hats that they have with the long bill that goes out the backside.
Right.
And over here I saw leather helmets.
Yes, the early helmets, well, actually the earliest helmets mostly weren't leather. The earliest helmets often were metal, and they were based on European military officers' helmets from the 18th and 19th century. And they really were not the greatest. Metal's not the greatest thing to be around.
I'm sure heat kind of boiled your brains.
Yeah, exactly. They would, the concept of the helmet, other than just looking impressive, which is never something that's not on a firefighter's mind.
Right.
But, in addition to that, the idea is it would protect you if stuff was falling out of the roof and hit you on the head. So, so they based it, like a lot of the rank systems and so forth in firefighting are based on came out of military experience that these guys would often have, and the designs often would too, of the helmets and of other things. But later, they did begin to adapt them with the idea of them actually being functional for firefighting. What you described, the traditional, American-style fire helmet, which had that brim that kind of tipped back a little bit and had the high, emblem front end. Sometimes that was leather. Later, it became, plastic or some kind of synthetic material like that. But it was supposed to protect you from stuff falling out of the ceiling and bonking you in the head. And offer you a little bit of protection, just like a construction worker's helmet would.
Right.
But that tilted brim at the back, the idea was that if water is pouring out of the ceiling, that gathers on that brim and then it's directed like a spout almost off of the back of the thing and doesn't go back. It doesn't go down the back of your shirt or whatever.
I was thinking it was a debris.
Yeah, and it's that
diverter,
too.
but
it is that too.
But the water makes perfect sense.
It would channel the water off of you, so it wouldn't go down your back, basically.
Okay, now let's work on the parade vehicle. Okay. Sorry to back you up.
That's okay. That's
some
okay.
of that is
this parade vehicle. This is a big, shaped like a hose carriage, and this one is from Fishkill Landing, New York, and it has beautiful engraving of firefighting imagery on its side. I don't really know what the metal is. Could be nickel. I'm not really sure.
I know it's bright and shiny. This is shiny. Again, if you get a chance to go to your YouTube site, I'm sure that you've got something on each one of these.
Pieces,
But these pieces are just, the first time I came here, I stood in awe at the shiny, the bright. These wheels are 5 foot round.
Right.
And the hose reel that he's talking about is probably 3 foot round in diameter and will hold what? Probably 200 feet of hose?
Well, it would if there was a place
If there was
to put a hose on it,
right,
but
right.
there isn't. Now, if you step down to the end here, though.
And they've got lanterns on them that are, again, all nickel plated or whatever. Just beautiful, beautiful pieces here.
Now, this one down at this end of the aisle is, the little kids always say this looks like what Cinderella went to the ball in. And that's not by accident. It's supposed to look like a royal carriage. It's shaped like a hose reel, but again, no place to put a hose in it. But if you look at the one in the middle there, this was built in Reading, Pennsylvania in the 1850s. It was built for the city of Philadelphia. And it's got a hose on it. That's a functional piece of firefighting equipment. And you see it's not much less ornate than the other two. It's got the beautiful clamshells and it's very, high style, right? But that one was actually built to be taken to a fire. And therein lies the tale, okay? You'll find that, like I said, firefighters, especially American firefighters, they love to have this beautiful, elegant, elaborate stuff. The trouble was occasionally I had to take it to a fire. And it would get smoke, water, mud, get dinged up, scratched up. You know, anything you can imagine would get on that thing. And these guys got really tired of seeing this stuff that they love so much get beat up in regular use. So eventually they developed just a very simple hose reel that they called a crab or a jumper or a spider. And they would pull that behind another rig to take the actual hose to the fire. But if you could afford it, you would have something like this. Excuse me. You would have something like this to take to the parades. And this one was built in New York City by a carriage maker called Buckley and Merritt. It was built in 1870, and it was built for the Hotchkiss Fire Department of Derby, Connecticut. And they had it for a very long time. I actually talked to a guy from that department who said that as a 17-year-old kid, first on the department, he was still pulling this in parades in the early 1960s. Now, as this goes down the street, these big carriage wheels turn. That turns this leather belt, and the center, the hose reel part, turns.
Oh, wow. Okay, now what he's showing here is there's a pulley on the back wheel that has a leather strap that comes on up to another pulley on the center hose reel, and the center hose reel spins inside with all of the what do you want, etching?
Well, it's mirrored, but it has
it's mirrored
these
with
etching designs.
And these etching designs would turn kind of like a kaleidoscope.
Exactly that. Now, a lot of times, parades in the 19th century were at night, and so you'd have one of these lanterns which have different paint.
And now he's pointing out carriage lanterns here, and these carriage lanterns have an amber lens in them or a red lens.
Or blue in some cases.
Are they blue in some
of them
cases?
are, yeah.
And it says Hotchkiss on it as far as the little glass panels. And this thing has 3 bells in the front.
Right.
It's got, I mean, this thing is just unbelievable to look at.
Well,
and
so
and
if
the more you look, the more you see.
Right. I mean, if the lanterns were lit, then at night, the surface would pick that up as it turned, and you get that beautiful kind of 19th century disco ball light show going, right?
With the blue and the red,
With
with the
different
blue and the
colors,
red
right,
lenses and stuff, you would.
Now, up top, the kids always giggle at naked guy with grape leaf and wings on his feet. But he was, well, if you were a Greek, you'd call him Hermes. If you were a Roman, you'd call him Mercury. But he was the son of Zeus in Greek mythology. So he was a symbol of speed. I mean, he's the messenger of the gods. So if you're the messenger of the gods, you better be fast, right?
Right.
So a lot of firefighters, both in Europe and America, used him as like a lot of things in firefighting. It's a way of bragging. It's saying like, that's how fast we get to fires. It's like we got wings on our feet. You know. He's also used by FTD Flowers for their delivery service.
Okay.
And it's for the same reason. This is how fast we get flowers to your mother. You know. Now, up front, as you said, there are bells. Now, and one of the big things in the 19th century is everybody had to have a motto, right? Mottos were a big deal. So this one says, read it off.
To do good is our intent.
Right, which seems kind of basic, but not a bad motto to live by.
Right.
But with this one, to tell you the truth, Loren, to show off, really, was a little bit
That was their intent?
In
to
this
show
case, yeah.
That wouldn't have looked nearly as good as a logo, though.
It was good marketing for the town and for the fire department to the town, Sometimes fire departments have to ask for a lot of money, a lot of appropriations for equipment and stuff like that. They want to be able to, they want to make sure that a fire department is something that the locals can take real pride in, okay? And this is an example of helping to build that. And you also mentioned that there are 3 bells. Am I going to blow out your mic if I ring just one of them?
Nope, you can ring them.
Okay. That's just one.
And these bells are all on springs, so as this thing's going down the road, these bells are going to be ringing constantly.
Yeah, and these metal tires are not going over nice paved roads.
Oh, no.
They're going over dirt roads, mud puddles, cobblestones, all that stuff.
And these bells, they sit at what, a 10-degree angle? Instead of sitting down straight, they sit out forward on these springs, so they're going to be just dinging the whole time.
You got a lot of racket. Whenever you got firefighters, you got to have some noise. Firefighters love noise. Now, this stuff, this kind of thing, still is true, okay? Especially smaller town firefighters, you'll find that what they'll often have, instead of this, they'll have a beautiful vintage fire truck, kind of like the ones we have
were
here.
Just at a parade, the fair parade in our local county in Wyoming.
Yeah.
They had a 1924 fire truck that went on down that still had the siren that they could make go, and followed up, of course, by the rest of the fire crew that's blowing their horns and tooting their...
That's what they do. That becomes the function of that beautifully restored vintage piece. It's this. It's what this used to be. And it's in the carries the Cherry Queen and the Cherry Festival Parade or whatever it is.
Right.
And that's, so these traditions just take slightly different shapes as the years go by. Now, if we step over here.
Now, just a second. Is this a pneumatic? Or is this just a hand crank from the back? I'm looking at a cart with 2 wheels. It's got a hose in the center. It's got probably a 60-gallon water tank, and it's hand pulled again. It's got a shaft going out the front with 2 handles, but it's got a hand crank in the back that I'm assuming is...
Well, I'll tell you what it is. This piece is a chemical cart. And how it worked is this one was probably for use in a factory or a big warehouse or something like that. It was something that would likely be privately owned.
Okay.
And it was sold by a company from Indiana called Boyer. And this is one of the very few pieces we have here at the museum that was never in active service. This was a floor model. This spent years and years being the demonstration model for Boyer for selling these things to factories and so forth. And what it did, and you'll see some smaller versions of it over on the wall in our display of fire extinguishers, it contained water and sodium bicarbonate. It was basically a big seltzer bottle.
Okay.
And you would introduce a little vial or a little bottle of sulfuric acid, and that crank was to agitate it.
Okay.
Mix in that sulfuric acid, and it produces carbon dioxide, and it becomes a big spray bottle. Small amount of water. This one, you're probably right, this was probably a 60-gallon tank. A lot of them carried only 40 gallons, but it would be expelled under tremendous velocity. And so it would really squelch that fire, really knock it out. And so it was what they like to call an initial attack vehicle. In a case like this, if you have an industrial fire, you might even be able to put it out if you get to it early enough. But
they wish they had one of those in Beirut last week.
That they do, man.
Ooh.
That was such a horrifying, tragic thing. And
no doubt.
Ongoingly, such a horrifying, tragic thing. But you'll also find these chemical tanks on some of the early trucks. And that was because it wasn't supposed to deliver a lot of water. It was supposed to deliver a little water really fast and really hard and knock down that fire so that you kind of dampened it and got it knocked down a little bit while the pumpers and so forth are getting hooked up, and they start putting serious water on. The trouble was, once you were done, you were done. It took hours to reload this thing in most cases.
Wow.
Now, we do have one that was designed in Albany, New York, and eventually went into service. It never went into production, but it went into service with the Cleveland, Ohio Fire Department. And that had this kind of ingenious system for reloading it within a few minutes and getting a second blast. But the chemical tanks were very, very useful. It's just that they had limited amount of water that they could get on the fire.
Okay.
Now, if you step over here, you'll notice
We start getting into the steam.
we do indeed. But I wanted to stop and let me ask you a little quick fire safety question.
Okay.
All right, so you're in a house or a building and it's on fire and it's filling up with smoke. So what do you do? How do you respond to that?
Get down as far as you can because smoke rises.
Very, very good, young man.
And try and wipe your eyes so you can see.
Right. Well, you get down, everybody knows, like the little kids that come through here, everybody's heard of stop, drop, and roll. And everybody should. That's very important. But that's if the fire is on you.
Right.
If it gets on your shirt or your pants or your skin, yes, you stop, cover your face, and roll, and you do it right away without even taking a second. You get down on the ground and roll over as fast as you can, and your body rolling over that fire, in most cases, it really will put it out because you cut off that oxygen. But there's another little rhyming thing that we wish more people knew, and that's fall and crawl. In a house, and it's fully, most people who die in house and building fires don't die from actually getting burned. They die from smoke. They get,
smoke inhalation fills up your lungs, and you cough just like we're sitting around the campfire.
Exactly, but in a much more
intense
way.
Well, and also the toxins.
Toxins are often involved in fires from houses. So smoke is the real most common killer in fires, and usually a lot of times by the time the fire gets to you, you're already dead. If you're stuck in a building or a house,
right?
To put it grimly. But you're exactly right. What you do is you fall and crawl. You get down on the ground and you crawl because smoke goes up, right? So down near the floor is where the good fresh air is that you can breathe, most importantly, but also that you can see in. So because also if there's smoke, you have a chance of getting lost in your own house.
Well, it blinds you.
Exactly. Now, we're standing in front of a guy who looks like he's something out of a scary movie. A guy in a blue pea coat. It's a mannequin wearing a blue pea coat, but on his head is a helmet, kind of over the.
And you can't see the smile on my face of realization of what I'm just looking at.
Yeah, this is one of the very early. Yeah, well, because you also very wisely are behind a mask, as am I. We do, by the way, just to quickly plug that in our current situation, we do require that people who come into the museum wear masks, and we ask that they socially distance, that they stay at least 6 feet away from people, anybody not in their own party. But we do have a lot of room here, so we are able, we think, to open with considerable safety as long as people follow some common sense.
You've got wide aisles.
Yeah,
you've got
exactly.
Very much.
But this guy is, we call him our Seba Gorman man because he was built by a British-German company called Seba Gorman, and they made diving bells and diving helmets and stuff like that. But they also made one of these early attempts at a breathing helmet. It's got a little chimney on top that exhausts, hopefully, the bad air. And it's also attached to a hose. And the hose goes out to this kind of bellows-like thing outside. It's a Greek invention called a spiralator. So his buddy stays outside and he pumps this thing and pumps, hopefully fresh, breathable air into his helmet. Must have been really, really unpleasant.
Well, now what we're looking at here is we got the mannequin that has axe stuck to his side for breaking through things.
Right.
He's wearing what I'm assuming is wool clothes.
Yeah, it looks like a big pea coat.
For insulation, like a big pea coat. And he's got a helmet on, and this helmet looks like something you'd see a jouster wear.
Right. Exactly.
But other than it's made out of leather, it's got two glass panels that come out at a V that can open up so he can breathe if he's where he can breathe. Mm-hmm. And it kind of gives him an angle or a view to where he can see a couple different directions. But then it's got an air hose that comes out of it, and this air hose has to be probably 60 feet long and goes to this big bellows that, like he said, his buddy would stand out there and pump. But it brings the air in and has a little exhaust valve out the top.
Yeah, now you'll notice
it's really, really cool looking.
Yeah, it's very cool looking, but you'll notice this little sign, code of signaling by means of lifeline. 1 tug, more air, 2 tugs, less air, 3 tugs, help me out.
Oh, man.
So I'm guessing it was 3 tugs.
Now, what were they tugging on? Did he have another line, or was he tugging on the hose?
He'd tug on the hose, so not a high-tech system.
I was going to say, and your hose could get hung up on your way in by something falling on it.
Fouled. Yeah, exactly.
There are no tugs when you need it.
No, this thing looks really primitive, but the truth is that they were using these in Britain and other parts of Europe up until about World War II.
Really?
In some places, yes.
Wow.
Now, if we step over
That is, when I saw that, I just had to smile because it's so intriguing.
Yeah, I find it fascinating. I'm very fond of them. We had the NBA great Bill Walton came in here and toured the place. He's a really fun guy, and I have a picture of it somewhere. But he's actually taller than our Seba Gorman man, even though Seba Gorman man is standing on a platform.
Wow.
So now here we have, this is an American classic right here, Loren. This is our Metropolitan steamer from Cincinnati, Ohio. This is a classic specimen of a steam fire engine. And it looks like something out of Willy Wonka's factory. That's
Oh,
what
it
I've
does.
heard the kids say. Very steampunk, literally.
Very.
But we have a big black tank that is full of water. And that water is not to put on the fire. That water is to boil. Down below it, there's a coal furnace. And you would boil that water, and it would stay. The idea was to keep the water like simmering hot, almost boiling, ideally 24 hours a day.
So they kept the fire going all the time in the
Exactly. They kept those coals banked. And in some small fire stations, it was actually the furnace in the fire station. The radiated heat was sufficient to heat the fire station.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but when the call comes in the really slick urban fire stations, they actually had it rigged so that the call coming in would pop open the stable doors. The horses, there were horses now for this one, the horses were very well trained. They would take their place in front of the rig.
Now talk about the well-trained horses, because I've heard stories that these horses were the harness was hung from the ceiling.
That's exactly
These
right.
horses, when the bell went off, would come on over. They'd back right into place. The harnesses would just drop right down on the horse.
Drop the harness in.
And they could harness them. They could latch up the harnesses and be ready to go like in 30 seconds or a minute or something like that.
Yeah, if they really had their act together, they used to be able to roll one of these out of a fire station in about 90 seconds to 2 minutes.
Which is just unbelievable. If you've ever harnessed a horse,
exactly.
90 seconds for a horse harnessing is...
that was they were very specially trained horses. And it's really about the same amount of time that it would take a modern fire engine company to get a truck out of a modern fire station. Now, it wasn't nearly as fast after that. You're going, you're a horse.
Now, was this drawn by 2 horses or by 4?
It varied, but this one was drawn by 3.
By 3?
Yeah.
Okay. And what we're looking at here is we're looking at a wagon that would look like your normal chuck wagon or old covered wagon as far as wheelbase and wheel size and that type of stuff. But it's got a boiler on the back that has a coal furnace on the bottom that you could keep stoked up with coal. I'm assuming that's probably 4 foot around.
Yeah,
and then it's got a water tank sitting on top for the boiler, and then it's got beautiful chrome top piece for the smokestack.
The smokestack is chromed, and then there's a scuttle back here which would be full of a kind of specialized coal that they called cannel that was very low ignition point. It burned very fast and very hot and very, very dirty. So you'd always get that big, nasty, greasy stream of smoke coming out. But so back here in the scuttle, you would ride the engineer and or the stoker. Sometimes they were the same person who would tend the engine and or the fire. Up front, you had a driver, and in another wagon, like the one down at the end there with the Dalmatians on it, you would have maybe a few more guys that would come with axes and ladders and hoses. I beg your pardon, but you would have. Basically, you would have an urban fire station could now be staffed with 8, 10, 12 guys a shift. So now, that was the big influence that this had. It was economically feasible for firefighting to be a job, an actual paid position, in the big cities, because the horses were really expensive.
Right.
So, to justify, it took a big city to justify, and, these weren't just any horses. These were big, muscular, strong draft horses.
Like the Clydesdales.
Clydesdales, Percherons, that kind of thing.
Yeah, Belgians.
And you needed 3 of them. You needed, veterinary care. You needed food. You needed to train them. You needed to maintain them. And about every 10, 12 years or so, you needed to replace them. That was about That was the working life of,
Right.
of a workhorse in the 19th century. So that was a lot of money. That was, and these were expensive, but they, you know, and they were high maintenance. You needed an engineer who knew what he was doing. But if you had one of these, you might have it for 20, 25 years. So you got a lot for your money, but the horses were a different story. Now, we have the engine here. You know, as your water's boiling, the smoke is forced into, excuse me, steam pipes in the bottom part of that smokestack.
Right.
And the pressure, nobody over there, right? The pressure would turn this. We have this hooked
Now
up
he's
to-
got this hooked up to an electric motor so that you can see how the steam pump actually works.
Right.
It brings the steam out, runs it through it's not a condenser, it's a cylinder, where it pushes the piston up and down, which
Right.
drives another crankshaft that
Exactly.
comes down into the pump.
You can see the interlocking gears here. It's pre-ball
Right.
bearing technology, and in the middle there is a big flywheel, which kind of
Right.
keeps the momentum going, and that turns those crank shafts up and down in these big old pistons, and that creates a vacuum. And that vacuum is what's used to suck water through these big hard suction.
And these are
rubber
what,
hoses.
4 or 5 inch hoses?
Right, and
They're big.
Those are your draft hoses. And then you have, you know, a wagon like that one comes by with a smaller gauge of hose and throws it down to you, and you hook that up here or here, and that is what you point at the fire. And you get, you know, that, my big I beg your pardon, excuse me.
No, we're good. You talk too much and you start coughing. I
Yeah,
do the
yeah,
same thing.
I'm starting to get a little bit of effect on the voice box. But that big hand pumper that I showed you from Pawtucket, Rhode Island, probably as good as a hand pumper's got. That'll get you about 250 gallons of water a minute, which is excellent. This would get you 600 to 700 gallons of water.
Wow.
So you could really kind of sock a fire in the nose with this thing. So that was the big advantage of it. The big disadvantage, and I can tell you, Loren, I can tell you this from firsthand experience because I've helped move this thing. It's really, really, really heavy. So you got to have
sure.
those big horses. There's not a prayer of pulling this by hand, especially because you no longer need the big crews. So now again, it becomes feasible for firefighting to be a city job. So these didn't last nearly as long as the hand pumpers. The hand pumpers were the state of the art for a couple of centuries. But when these came in the 1850s, and they lasted, the latest you would have probably seen one of these, most places would be maybe 1920.
Okay.
Okay? They got replaced about 100 years ago by what?
The fire truck.
Right, exactly. The
Ford
internal combustion engine.
The Rios
Yeah.
and yeah.
And that's the thing. Firefighting is, in the small c sense of the word, conservative. Firefighters are very, very reluctant to change. There's a favorite joke in the fire service. The two things firefighters hate are change and the way things are now. You know,
Those are the only two things, huh?
exactly. But when the chance came in for firefighters to get rid of the horses, they were like, yes, we're doing it. Because not that they didn't love the horses, but the horses were expensive, they were high maintenance, all of that stuff. When the fire trucks came in, you know, they didn't scoff. They were like, yes, let's do this, most of them.
Right.
So now, we're standing next to the steamer. We're standing in front of a display that we love here.
I love this one.
Yeah, this is a sled, a firefighting sled. This is what they call up in Michigan, which is where this is from, a pung, P-U-N-G. That's the
Okay.
Algonquin word for sled. But this is a fire sled. This was from the city of Negaunee, Michigan, which is on the Upper Peninsula, and it's really nasty and cold up there most of the time. And this was to take firefighters and axes and hoses and ladders and so on to a fire at a barn or a farmhouse or whatever out in the during, you know, when it was winter. And you know, one of the things that I like about it, it's a big, brown, beautiful, you know, you heard of a one-horse open sleigh. This is a two-horse open sleigh.
But it's not just an old, I mean, this thing is big. It's 12 feet long. It's got two rails of sled tracks on
you
it.
could remove those tracks.
Skis.
Yeah, exactly. You could remove those tracks in the summer if you wanted to put wheels on it, too.
Okay, and it's about 4 foot wide. It's
Right.
got a ladder on it that's 12 foot long. a place for a couple people to drive horses in front.
You got a hose bed full of hose.
Yeah, it's just a beautiful piece, and it's a dark brown.
Now, of course, if they don't hear you coming, one of the things I like about it is, this.
It's got a little hand lever that you can put in there, and it runs the bell up front.
Right.
And you got to keep pushing it in order to get that bell to move.
I'll show you that partly because I wanted to ring that bell, but partly because it shows how when you have different environments, you have to have different kinds of equipment that adapt to whatever those environments are. I mean, here in Phoenix, this would have been pretty much useless, but even up in Flagstaff or Prescott or Sedona, back in 1890, this would have come in handy part of the year.
Yeah.
Now, this was built by Studebaker.
Oh, really?
Studebaker. People don't always know that Studebaker, before they made cars, made really a little bit of everything, but their specialty was things like horse carts and sleds,
wagons and covered wagons, and
exactly.
I mean, they were making that stuff clear back in the early 1800s.
Exactly.
Studebaker was a big time.
They went way back. But we had a Studebaker car club come in here for a tour, and boy, they went nuts when they saw this. They took all these pictures. We ended up on the cover of their newsletter, and everything. It was a big deal. But we also had a group of very elderly people from Ahwatukee, a suburb of Phoenix here, and from a retirement community, and they came in here, and there was this great old guy. He was in a wheelchair. He's 94 years old, if I recall, and everybody was kind of waiting up front while the activities lady got him signed in, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this guy busts out with, "I was a firefighter in the city of Negaunee, Michigan." Like, excuse me, so I bring him back here, and we got a great picture of him. His name was Doug. He was really cool.
Did he remember driving it?
That's what I wanted. I mean, because he was 94. I mean, he
could have
still had this. When he was a firefighter as a young man. But if he did, he kept it to himself. Put it that way. But boy, he was. That was a big thrill for me.
Yeah.
All right. So last thing here in Gallery 1, the Dalmatian. That's Rosie, named by my daughter, and that's Pete, her friend. So why are the Dalmatians associated with the fire service?
I have no idea, but I'll bet you're going to tell me.
I'm going to tell you.
I need to hear this story.
Well, Dalmatians, I mean, if you ever watch the Westminster Kennel Club Dog Show or something like that, you will see that they are still classed with the working breeds.
Okay.
It's just that what they were bred to do mostly doesn't exist anymore. So now they're mostly just used as pets or sometimes mascots. In Europe, they were referred to as Dalmatians because the breed was supposed to have originated on the Dalmatia coast in what's now Croatia.
Okay.
In America, they were often called coach dogs or carriage dogs. And that's because that was what they did. They were to run alongside urban horse teams, coach teams. And they would sort of encourage the horses. They would bark. They would sort of announce that a big carriage was going through an intersection. But their biggest job, as strange as it seems, is they were guard dogs. The horse theft was actually a much bigger problem for people in the 19th century than car theft has been for us in modern times. People stole horses constantly because there just wasn't a very good way to keep them secured.
Right.
And so if, Pete or Rosie here saw somebody come up to that horse that she didn't know, she'd hopefully bite him on the leg or chase him away or whatever, or at least bark and raise hell. And so that was actually kind of what they were for. The Budweiser Clydesdales, for instance, they still use Dalmatians. But not many people have big horse-drawn carriages anymore, so now the Dalmatians are kind of out of work. And, it's a funny thing. There was a big vogue after those Disney movies came out of people wanting Dalmatians. But they're wonderful dogs, but they're not low-maintenance dogs. They're kind of high-maintenance. They're kind of high-strung, nervous. They can be a little feisty. And horses, of course, are kind of high-strung, nervous, jumpy animals. And when you get the two together, they just kind of chill each other out. They kind of babysit the horses. They're just the horse's best friend. And that was their real function back in those days. So now the reason they became especially associated with the fire service has to do with early prints and lithography. lithography was one of the first ways that just sort of ordinary people, as opposed to rich people, could have art in their homes.
Okay.
These early prints. And one of the really popular subjects was a steamer, a fire steamer, racing through the streets of a city. And the artists would often put in a few Dalmatians running alongside. It's a little exaggerated, really, how common they were. It's not like every fire station had one. But that really kind of cemented them in the public mind and in firefighters' minds as sort of their dog. And so even after they didn't need horses in the fire station anymore, the Dalmatian they still thought of as kind of, that's the firefighter's dog. Now, in reality, of course, all kinds of animals have been used as mascots in the fire service. There's, in...
Smokey the Bear.
Well, he's a favorite. We got him back here. I can show you. I can introduce you to him if you want. He hangs out in our wildland gallery. But, there's, everything you can imagine. Parrots and monkeys and boa constrictors and everything else have been here in Phoenix, for instance, the first mascot of the Phoenix Fire Department was a goat, Homer the goat, just a stray goat that wandered in, and they took him in. Eventually, they banished him out to a farm in Glendale because he was busting into the neighbors' vegetable gardens too much.
Well, that's different than what I thought. I thought he was probably on every single one of their vehicles, and they couldn't keep him off.
Nah, I mean, that may have been true.
Not that that's true about goats or anything, but I do have hoof prints on top of my cars.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Well, yeah, and there are people who now do yoga with goats running around on their backs, right? So,
right.
Then later, there was also a station downtown that had a coyote, Rex the Coyote.
Okay.
So, anything you can imagine. Now, usually now insurance won't let you keep an animal in a fire station. So at least for now, the era of the firehouse mascot.
So we've just been through
but
Gallery 1. We've still got 3 more galleries to go through, but we're coming into more of the mechanized fire trucks and some of that kind of stuff. I think we're going to pick up the pace a little bit now. That Gallery 1 is just so doggone interesting.
Yeah, and as long-winded as I was in there, I promise you, we barely scratched the surface. But we are, like you said, we're going to kind of move it along from here.
Well, we covered a lot of history in that part too, and so let's get going.
Well, when I do the tours, I have a tendency, like I said, to get bogged down out there. And it's partly just because I like it, but also, as you said, it's the part I think that people know the least about.
Right.
And so when we get in here, it's fire trucks, and everybody loves them, but I think people are more familiar with what they will see in here. What I'm standing in front of here is the oldest fire truck that we have that was built to be a fire truck. This one was built in England by a company called Merryweather, and it was built for the city of Lima, Peru, the International Fire Department of Lima, Peru. And they had it, how it ended up in Phoenix, I'm not really sure. But they had it there in Lima from the 19-teens and the 1920s.
And this is a ladder truck?
This is a ladder truck, that's exactly right. This is what they called a braidwood body, because it's also a pumper. They have a nice old school British pump that was designed by a fire chief in England called Braidwood. And the chief didn't really do a lot of accounting for the safety of his guys. As you can see, there's a big central box that the guys would just sit on top of, and they have a brass bar in the middle to hold on to, but that's basically it. And that was a dangerous thing, really. And then there is a ladder suspended up top, which you can pop off, and it's wheeled, and you can go up and get people. That's an escape ladder, as they call it.
Okay.
Or the Brits actually call it a fire escape. It means something different.
So this ladder comes off with these wheels, and you can wheel it up to the side of a house,
or
and
the
then
front, and go right on up.
So it doesn't stay on the truck like what you'd think of a ladder truck.
Exactly. No. It's not an extension ladder in that way. And those didn't really come along until a little bit later. There were some horse-drawn ones. But that had a spring-powered ladder that you would send up. But this was a slightly different example.
Okay, now there's something that I've seen on several of the pieces in there, and now I'm starting to see it here with the trucks also. On top of your pumps, you have a cylinder that, in this case, it's probably 10 inches round, about 2 foot tall, and it sits on top of the pump. Now, is that for equalization of the water?
That's exactly what it's for. That's an air chamber. And you'll see it on the many of the hand pumpers too.
Right.
Most
Oh
of
yeah,
them.
I saw.
Yeah.
I've been seeing them everywhere I go.
It was nice even with them, but that was, a lot of these were repeating pumps, and so if you didn't have that, you would have almost a machine gun effect with the water. It'd be like, pop, 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 coming out of the hose.
Okay.
And that is really hard on the pump. In fact, with a motorized pump, it would tear it up in a very short period of time. So that would introduce that little bit of air pressure that would give you that nice steady outflow of water. Make sense?
Okay. Now I think I've seen stuff like this maybe in houses with steam radiators and stuff where they have a cylinder. Nothing nearly this size,
Right.
but I was wondering if that's what that was
Well,
for.
we'll see, and you can kind of see it through if you see there's a great big chrome ball that's on the front over by the far wall there. That is the front of one of our Aaron's Fox rigs, and Aaron's Fox wore that big chrome ball up front like a badge of honor.
Okay.
And they had a pump up front, and they were popular in places that had waterfronts because you could wheel them down a pier or onto a riverbank and run your hose out into the water. But that big chrome ball was kind of their trademark. That was the thing that people loved about them.
Okay.
Now, if you step over here, but yes, that kind of coppery one on the Merriweather from Lima is a little different formation of it, but it's the same sort of.
There lots of different formations. Wow. Look at the light on this thing. That's a spotlight, I'm assuming.
Yeah, we take a lot of care to have this one well presented because this fire truck, we got some rare fire trucks here at the museum. This is a really common fire truck. This is the kind of truck you would have seen all over America, other parts of the world as well, in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, into the 1950s. This one was in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. As you guessed, we got a lot of pieces from Wisconsin and from the upper Midwest in general. That's because the museum started in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin.
Oh, okay.
But this, it was there for a while, but this was the first truck in the museum, and this is a classic American fire truck. It's an American LaFrance. An American LaFrance, there lots of automotive companies made fire trucks. Ford made fire trucks, Chevy and Dodge, Mack out of Allentown, PA made fire trucks. We have a bunch of them here. Stutz, the Bearcat people, made that fire truck right down the aisle there in the 1920s.
Okay.
They were better known for, the Stutz Bearcat and for luxury cars and race cars, but they did also make some fire trucks. But there were also some companies that specialized in fire trucks. Aaron's Fox, Seagrave, a few others. Probably the most famous of those was American LaFrance, then out of Elmira, New York. And they also made city buses, but their real specialty was fire trucks. And they only went into Chapter 11, 10, 12 years ago.
Oh, I was going to say they're still making the fire trucks, aren't they?
They may still be doing some stuff.
I don't know.
But they, Phoenix had American LaFrances well into the 21st century. They made this truck in 1924 for Oshkosh. It was with them, it had a long career, 31 years. 1955 is when they retired it, and it was bought by, and you'll see there's a placard here with a picture. This nice lady sitting in the front of the truck was Olive Getz, and she bought it as a gift for her husband, George Getz.
Wow.
And he had just said casually one day while they were driving along in the 50s there, he noticed this truck sitting in front of a car dealership, said, it'd be fun to have one of those. So she sent her son, Bert, back to purchase this truck, and it was really basically intended kind of as a gag gift, basically. Somehow kept it a secret from him, gave it to him on Christmas of 1955.
Wow.
And he loved it, he went nuts, and he gave his kids and neighborhood kids rides in it, but he also developed, I guess the kind word would be an interest in fire trucks, and he started to accumulate more and more of them. And really in a very short time, 1961, he had enough to start a small museum in Kenosha, Wisconsin. They lived in Lake Geneva.
Okay.
And this truck became a reserve vehicle for the Lake Geneva Fire Department. But they eventually, he started to collect more and more stuff, and he had enough to start a museum. And so that's how and some crony of his said, you should call it the Hall of Flame. And so he did. So I always say we're one of the few museums that has a pun for a name.
Yeah, and how did it end up here in Phoenix?
Well, because the family moved out here,
Oh.
and they brought the collection with them.
Okay.
Excuse me. So we're going to head this way.
I think you talk too much. That's
Yeah,
the reason you're coughing.
I think that's the problem. It's starting to get to me a little.
But I'm enjoying
Yeah.
the heck out of this talking too
Well, I
much.
really appreciate that. I do appreciate that.
This is so danged informative.
My wife and daughter don't always appreciate it. So. Now this is
Beautiful.
Yeah, this is probably, most people would say that this is maybe the most beautiful of our trucks. And I would tend to agree. What we're talking about is a great big 30s era fire truck that is painted white, and it says NFD across the hood. And this is an American LaFrance 400 series from Johnny Carson's hometown of Norfolk, Nebraska. And it has, and the hood is raised so you can see it, it has a V12 engine, and behind that, the pump for the water. So it's got a lot of weight up front, but even so, this could do about 60 miles an hour, which the little kids never seem to find that all that impressive, but for a 1935 and a vehicle this big, that was pretty good. And the pump could deliver well over 1,200 gallons of water a minute. So you could get to a fire pretty fast, and you had a lot of options for fighting it when you got there. And never to be underestimated with firefighters, you look good getting there.
Oh, and this truck is just awesome looking. It is white, like he said. It's got the hose connections hanging out the side. It's got ladders that are just beautiful hanging off the side. The scroll work with the pen striping is just unbelievable. The dash and is all chromed or nickel plated or whatever. And this engine is really kind of baffling to me. He said it's a V12,
So I was
but yet it looks like it's got 2 spark plugs per cylinder.
Okay.
And if you count them, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, so that'd be 12, but I'm wondering why the 2 spark plugs per cylinder. I know that that's common in airplanes.
I don't know.
But
you're talking to the wrong guy. That's not my wheelhouse,
this is just,
unfortunately.
I like vehicles,
Yeah,
and
sure.
of course I'm looking at this engine just like, wow.
Yeah. Well, if you get the old timers in here, they'll tell you this is maybe the finest fire truck ever made. It's like the Rolls Royce of fire trucks.
It looks like the Rolls Royce of fire trucks.
And that front end is built to look like a Rolls or a Packard or a Bentley or one of those the Duesenberg, one of those old school cars.
It is just beautiful.
But it was also very, very effective. Now, but the thing was, it was too expensive. It was the middle of the Great Depression. This cost about $13,000. Might as well have been $13 million for all the more most towns could afford it. So LaFrance couldn't move these, and so they made them. They didn't make all that many of them. They made fewer than 200.
Wow.
That one over there that says Burlington, that's the same truck from 1938. The only difference is they put doors on that one, and it's red. But it was, I've often wondered over the years if, who the salesman was who managed to sell small Midwestern farming towns these trucks in the middle of the Depression. But it's a beautiful truck and one of our favorites.
Very beautiful. And what's the deal with this truck right here? This is interesting.
Well, this is a very important piece. This is kind of the missing link in the evolution of the fire truck. This, when you talk about the Industrial Revolution, people were leaving the rural areas. They were going to the urban areas. Urban areas are getting bigger. Cities are getting bigger, but they're also getting taller.
Okay.
And what that meant in firefighting was that they were having really nasty, deadly fires in high places. Places like, tenement fires, factory fires, theater fires, that sort of thing. And this was a response to that, because what they discovered was that it's just hard to get water to go up. Water doesn't go up. So this is what they call a water tower, and it's got a big kind of crane-like dinosaur neck-looking thing sticking out there over the door to Gallery 2. And you'll see at this end, there is a crank, a big crank, and one guy with arms like Popeye and a waist like a supermodel would crank this thing, and it would go up there, and then
the cable would pull it up like a crane.
Exactly, and then you could attach it just to a hydrant, or you could attach it to a pumper, even better, and it would pump water up to a high floor of a building or onto the roof or whatever. You also have these deluge cannons, which you can direct even more precisely. Now, this big god-awful thing was built in 1897 to be pulled by a team of 4 horses. And then a few years later, 1909, they gave the horses a break, and they attached that tractor to it. And as you can see, it's gasoline powered. The gas tank is right behind the guy's seat. I don't know how OSHA would go for that.
Yeah, there's about 10 gallons is what it would hold.
And this would go chugging through the streets of Toledo, Ohio at about 10 miles an hour. So you hope the building burned nice and slow. But this is kind of how fire trucks began. It's really how trucks of any kind began. Is instead of hooking a horse up to something, you'd hook a tractor up to it, and you kind of have a truck. Actually, another example of that, if you step over this way.
Now, this thing's a really interesting looking piece. I mean, you've got this crane apparatus out the back with the fire hose. You got 2 other hose setups that are just water cannons. This thing is probably 30 foot long. It's got this crane on it that extends another 15 feet beyond the back. So I'm assuming that it'd reach up to shoot water 3rd story of a building.
At least, yeah.
And if you angled it up, you could probably get up quite a bit higher. The wheels on this thing, the back wheels are probably 5 foot tall, but the front and they're solid wheels. They're rubber, but they're solid. And the front are about 3 foot in diameter, but man, this thing's just a cool looking, like you said, it looks kind of like a dinosaur.
It does, yeah. Kind of got that look. But, here we have a Mack truck, right? And everybody knows the famous Mack Bulldog.
Right.
This one is from 1948 from Pierre, South Dakota, and it's got the Mack Bulldog. But right across the aisle, this is a Mack that shows you where the Bulldog came from. This is a 101-year-old fire truck. This was built in 1919, and it was built as an Army truck, a U.S. Army truck. And in World War I, British soldiers started referring to that blunt front end of the Mack truck as a Bulldog. As they started calling the trucks the Bulldog, so Mack picked up on that and adopted it. But this particular truck was an Army truck. It was bought later in the early 1920s as Army surplus by the city of Baltimore, Maryland. And they did that same thing of a conversion. They, in their own shops, turned it into a fire truck. They hooked up those big ladder wagons, which had been horse-drawn ladder wagons.
Right.
They also hooked up those chemical tanks. Now, you can't see them as well from this side. Those big copper chemical tanks, like we were talking about.
Like what we talked about in Gallery 1.
They had an attachment of those, and then they had this life net, which is the thing you always see in the movies.
I have never seen one of these in real life. The canvas life net that has a big hoop with 20 guys around it, so you could jump out of the 3rd story building and
that
hopefully.
Was the theory, but it didn't always work. That was the problem.
I'll bet that some people didn't make it.
People missed, and that was really bad. Also, sometimes they'd hit the firefighters, and that was really bad. Also, the firefighters were supposed to hold it with their hands pronated, and their knees bent a little so they could absorb that impact. It's a lot of body falling from a height like that. Well, sometimes they'd forget. They'd hold the palms up. They'd lock their knees. You get broken knees, broken wrists, whatever. So it was. They weren't the greatest, and most places actually outlawed them by the 20s or 30s. But some places were using them up till the 60s. You see them in the movies all the time. They're a real iconic part of firefighting war, but they don't really. They weren't really the greatest thing. And you kind of want...
And these things aren't that... I mean, they're not that big around. They're probably, 10 foot circumference?
Right, and it's hard to know where you're going to land when you jump out of a building. And so you want to wait for them to get a nice ladder up.
Well, I always just thought it was a canvas attached to the rail, but what I'm seeing here is that you have springs.
You have springs, so it gives you a little trampoline.
It has a little bit more of a... Okay, so that would take some of the shock out, but still, you got... 10 or 12 guys standing around that thing and 150 pounds coming out of a 3rd story building. That thing's going to hit hard.
No, exactly. From 2 stories up, maybe 3, you could use this. Any higher than that, it wasn't the greatest. You wanted to wait for somebody to get a ladder to you. And you'll find that even to this day, really tall buildings aren't firefighters' favorite things.
Well, and something else that's interesting about this Mack truck is that these old Macks were chain driven.
Yes.
They did not have a drive line, so to speak. They came back to a gearbox, and they chain drove the back wheels.
Looks almost like a bike chain. My father, God rest him, was a truck driver, and he remember CB handles back in the 70s? Yeah. His CB handle was chain drive because that's how far back he went in the truck.
Oh, wow.
So he would well recognize a chain like this.
A lot of those old Mack trucks, the old semis and stuff, were all chain driven and.
Well, and the one from Lima, that's also, it's got a.
Oh, is
chain.
it?
That's
Okay.
Chain driven as well, yeah.
Okay, and now you got this fire engine that is set up for the kids or for
Right.
taking pictures or whatever. That's
Yep.
free to crawl on, climb on.
This is a
And take pictures?
1951. Yeah, it's a 1951 American LaFrance. It's the youngest truck that we have in this gallery, and it's from Miami, Arizona. They donated it to us, and we don't have a white chain around it. Excuse me. We don't have a weight chain around it. It's for anyone who wants to, but especially kids, to climb on and play on and stuff. And as a result of that, we don't take as much care with its finish and its paint job and everything. But as a result of that, it's probably the most beloved truck that we have in the museum. Now, of course, in the current circumstances, we have to come back and wipe it down with, disinfectant
Right.
and everything a couple times a day. And we do that, but it's a big favorite with our visitors.
Yeah, and it just goes to show, like we were talking in the very beginning, how you guys are geared for the kids to come here and see, and any kid that any young man, and I'm sure a lot of girls,
More and more young girls.
it's one of those things that it's just it's an awesome display for the kids.
Well, we have some really some marvelous stuff for kids, but I always try to emphasize it's a great museum for kids. It's a great museum for adults. Maybe not always at the same time. If you're in here with a bunch of kids, it may be hard to really get the full historical experience. You come in by yourself. If if you have a kid and you're trying to do that, it's kind of boring for them, maybe. So it's a great museum for both demographics.
Oh, definitely. And if you're a firefighter and you're missing this museum, I mean, this to me, if you were a firefighter, would be worth the plane ride to Phoenix just to come see.
We get firefighters from all over the world. Part of our problem, Loren, is that we're not as well known locally as we'd like to be. We get firefighters, history buffs, motorheads, people like that who come in from Belgium and South Korea and New Zealand and anywhere, South Africa, anywhere you can imagine. But locally, we get people all the time who are like, gee, I lived here 20 years. I never knew this was here. And so that's kind of an ongoing problem for us. But yeah, firefighters and history buffs and people who are interested in motor vehicles, that's a big part of what we do here. Now, we're standing in front of, right now, another part of our function here is memorializing firefighters. We have a memorial here to the 9/11 firefighters. This is a big model of a painted pony that is intended as a tribute to the FDNY, but also to the officers of the NYPD and the New York and New Jersey Port Authority that died in 9/11. And we got a lot of other side displays connected to that. Over there in the bricks on the floor, we have a memorial to the Granite Mountain hotshots, the 19 young guys who died in the Yarnell Hill fire just about 7 years ago here in Arizona. And then on the walls, we have firefighters who either died in the line of duty or in some cases didn't die, but who did something heroic and were decorated for bravery or recognized in some way for bravery. So if you have time ever to look around at some of these individual stories, it's real lump in the throat stuff.
Wow.
And sometimes firefighting can be a dangerous job, and sometimes firefighters get hurt, and sometimes they get killed. And we just think, it's important for us to acknowledge that heroism and that dedication. And that's what this is one of the more solemn parts of the museum, but we are very proud of it.
Yes.
So now, I want us to go all the way to the back two galleries.
Okay.
Gallery 3 and Gallery 4. Gallery
And you got, just as a heads up for people, we've got, 35, 45
something like that.
engines in here?
We have between 90 and 100 large wheeled pieces on the floor at any given time. And so it's a lot to look at. And we have about another third of the museum of the collection is in our warehouse, and we kind of rotate through. So it may not be the same set of displays when you all come through as when we're here today, but we always have something cool to look at.
That warehouse that you're talking about is pretty dang cool. I had the opportunity a few years back. I was here looking for handles on the hand-pulled carts because a friend of mine is restoring one. And I got pulled down there to the warehouse, and it is a whole another museum.
It really is, and we a lot of times we wish that we could put more of this stuff up here. But when I was first working here, about a decade and a half ago, that had not been built yet, and the museum in those days, honestly, it was more like a garage than a museum. The collection, the trucks were stacked, so you could usually only really look at one side of them. And so it really has freed up a lot of floor space and made the presentation a lot better, but the price we pay for that is that we can't put everything on the floor that we would like to.
Now, if you had a dedicated firefighter that was wanting to see the lower warehouse, is there an extra fee they can pay to go see that? Or
we don't make them pay an extra fee, but we do. The only reason that it wouldn't happen is if nobody was available at a given time to take them down there. If there's anybody around, and there usually is, who, if they ask, and in some cases they're asking about a specific piece that's in storage instead of
which was my case.
Right, and we'll take them down and show them around.
Cool.
It's not a public area, and it's a little cluttered and everything.
Well, yeah, it's not presented anything like this.
Exactly.
It's a warehouse, exactly like what you said.
And a
but
workshop also.
I've kind of found, just as a side note, I went to the Hershey, Pennsylvania car museum.
I see.
And it was a nice museum up on top, but I was looking for something specific, and they said, "Oh, we've got one of those down in the basement." Mm-hmm. And I says, "Well, what do I have to do to see it?" They said, "Well, an extra $10 will get you down there." And I says, "Well, here's my $10." I walked into that, and I was dumbfounded by what was down there. I mean, it was just unbelievable. The cars that they had down there was probably twice as many as what they had on display up on top. Wow. Again, parked really tight together. But for $10, I saw 3 times the museum. Oh, it was fantastic.
Well, so now we're in Gallery 3, and some of these are the trucks that we take out in parades and public events. My daughter and I got to ride on top of one of these in the Fiesta Bowl parade one year.
Oh, that's cool.
Standing right in front of our Van Pelt, a 1957 Van Pelt from Mesa, Arizona, came back to us after being in various other places, including Monterey, California, for a number of years. But I just think that front end is particularly beautiful. I really like this truck very much. But we have a couple of other special things here. One of them is we have an old school call box. An alarm box.
Right.
This one was in Glendale, California, and it was made by a company called Gamewell. This one was a little later than most of them. This one was from the 1920s. But if you're in Glendale and you see a building on fire, you run over here, and as long as they've remembered to wind it up, which they didn't.
They didn't.
So, yeah.
Yeah. This is like a parking meter. It stands about 6 foot tall, and it has a pull handle that when you pull it down, there's a button on the inside, and you can push the button. And then it just sounded
it would sound a code of 1 1 2 3 1 1 2 3, and that way the guy at the dispatch center would know to dispatch trucks.
Okay, so these were wired into dispatch center.
Exactly. Now,
okay, because you've got your dispatch center set up here.
Right. Now, if you step over here, you'll notice a truck that responded to 9/11. So again, this is one of the somber things. Yeah, this is Rescue 4 from Manhattan. It was from I'm blanking for a second. I'm sorry. From Queens.
Okay.
And it responded to 9/11. Now, rescue trucks were a very prestigious order of fire stations in New York. The rescue guys, you wouldn't find any pumpers or water or anything like that on this, or ladders or anything. What you would find in there would be things like jackhammers and hearse tools and This was for a major
rescue.
This was for like a building collapse, a bridge collapse, something like that, an airplane crash. That is what these were built to respond to. The whole crew on this, sadly, was lost. The crew also of Rescue 3 from Harlem and the Bronx was also lost that morning. And so it's been turned by some restorers from Chicago, turned this into more of a kind of a memorial vehicle. And so this doesn't really look like it would have looked going down the street in New York. This is the second youngest truck that we have in the collection. It's from 1997, and we are very proud to display it. Now,
And this is a huge truck. I mean, this thing's 45 foot, 50 foot long.
Exactly.
It's huge, and they've done a very nice job of the commemoration or whatever. They've got, in memory of the crew members, sticker on the side. They've got a rescue from the Bronx Harlem, big blue.
Yeah, that's Rescue 3.
That's Rescue 3.
Yeah, this door was put on because it needed a door and also to memorialize the crew from Rescue 3.
And then it's
on
got...
the other side, you'd see that one with Popeye, that logo with Popeye.
Okay.
That was Rescue 4's logo.
Okay. It's just it's a big truck. This thing's huge.
Very big, and it was for handling big responses. Now, if you step down here into Gallery 4, you will see the actually youngest truck or vehicle that we have in our collection, and it's for a very sad reason that it's here. This is a transport buggy, a Ford F-750 transport buggy, and this is one of the two vehicles that carried the Granite Mountain hotshots, the 19 guys who died in the Yarnell Hill fire up near just a little south of Prescott, Arizona, just about 7 years ago. And this one was one of two vehicles. The city of Prescott abandoned that company, the Granite Mountain Hotshots. It was decided to just end that program. Only one of the 20-man crew survived. The other 19 died, and there were two of these.
They made a movie about this.
They did indeed, and they used this vehicle and the other vehicle, I'm sorry, in that movie. But they did put them in storage, and they were going to sell them. Well, the guy who's the vice president of the Firefighting Museum in Los Angeles, the County Fire Museum of Los Angeles, one of his kids was one of the guys who died, and he didn't want to see these just sold as surplus city property. He got an anonymous donor in the LA area to donate $25,000. It was the only bid that was made for both vehicles. They were both bought. We have 7A. The guy's son rode on 7B, so that's over. That one's over in Los Angeles. So this is one of the few that we don't own. We're just kind of hosting this one. And we'll probably have it for many years, but if they ever got a museum or some kind of facility up in Prescott that could accommodate this, we would send it back to them.
Wow.
Now, if we step over here, you mentioned one of our favorite people here a little while ago, and I wanted to make sure you got a chance to see him. It's our friend Smokey the Bear. This is at the entrance to our Wildland Gallery. And, Smokey, this is actually a Smokey suit that some poor probie from the Forest Service would have to wear.
Preferably on a 114-degree day in Phoenix, yes.
So you can't do it for much more than, 5 minutes tops. But Smokey, what a lot of people don't know, you may know this, is that Smokey was a real bear. He didn't really wear jeans and a ranger's cap, but he was a little black bear, actually. They picture him as kind of like a grizzly or something like that, but he was a little black bear that, sad to say, lost his mom in a fire in New Mexico called the Capitan Gap Fire.
That was close to Lincoln, New Mexico, correct?
That's probably right. I don't know that area that well. They do have a museum over there we should probably check out.
I'm planning on it this fall, probably.
I am hoping to go over there also sometime. But it was, he lost his mom in this fire and got pretty badly hurt in that fire, but the park rangers rescued him, and they took him to the vet, and he was just a tiny little guy, but the vet patched him up, and he got better, and he was very cute, but he was a bear, and he was getting bigger. They couldn't keep him, and they couldn't turn him loose. He wouldn't have been able to take care of himself out in the forest. So they talked the National Zoo in Washington, D.C., into taking him on, and he became a permanent guest there. And I always try to impress the kids, again, they never are, that when I was a little kid in the late 60s, I went with my family to the National Zoo in D.C., and I saw the real Smokey. It's a very vivid memory for me. I did.
No, I'm impressed.
Yeah, well, I'm glad somebody finally is. Yeah, he was very old. He, went to Bear Heaven just a few years later, and they brought him back to Capitan and buried him there. He has a grave there.
Really?
Yeah, but he was... candidly, he looked kind of scraggly and scroungy. But it's a very vivid memory for me that I can remember. It made a big impression on me that you could still, as old a guy as he was, you could still see the burns on his kind of his front legs and his chest and his face from where he'd been burned all those years earlier as a little guy. But I always like to tell the kids that story because it's a great reminder that when you go out into the forest or the desert, all this beautiful wilderness we have in this country, that's somebody's home too. There's a lot of wonderful plant and animal life out there, and it really messes up their life. Most of them aren't as lucky as Smokey. You know, it really messes up their life if they have a fire. But also, the men and women who do that work, the smoke jumpers and the hot shots, it's really hard and really dangerous work, and we really owe those people a great debt of gratitude, but also we want to keep them as much out of harm's way as we can. And that's kind of what this gallery is devoted to. It's devoted to wildland firefighting. One of my favorite trucks we're standing in front of now, big, beautiful Moreland pumper built in 1930 in Burbank, California. For the Los Angeles County Forestry Department. This served the Topanga Canyon area in LA when it was a lot more remote than it is now. And it was a pumper that was built, a Pumper G that was built to serve that area. And it could do pump and roll. It could pump about 600 gallons of water that it carried. But its big job was it was a brush truck for fighting wildfires. The one in the middle there is from the Chattanooga, Tennessee area, served Lookout Mountain, which overlooks Chattanooga, and served brush fires and so forth there. We have a display of models of firefighting aviation.
Now, where we live is where Hawkins and Powers is from. I don't know if you've heard of Hawkins and Powers or not.
Not off the top of my head.
They had aerial firefighting planes, and in fact, they ended up going out of business because two of their planes, due to a fault in the C-130s, ended up crashing within a year.
I see.
They lost a wing. I don't know if you remember that happening here probably 20 years ago.
Right. So that drove them out of business.
But they have a firefighting museum there in Grable that still has several of their planes.
Interesting.
It's an aerial firefighters.
Yeah. Well, this is
museum.
the thing. These models, the Arizona Modeling Club or the Phoenix Modeling Club did this display for us. It's fantastic. One of the few things I envy the Phoenix Police Museum is that they have a police helicopter in there.
Right.
You know, a police helicopter is smaller than a firefighting aircraft, so they can fit it in there. It's very cool. And that's another museum, if you're here in Phoenix, that I recommend you checking out, is the police museum.
I did go check out the police museum, but it's closed right now due to the COVID.
Yeah,
and you know, I really wanted to cover that while I was here. I'm going to be back down here. My daughter lives down here.
Right.
The whole Miranda rights thing all happened right here in
There's
Phoenix.
An excellent display of artifacts from the Miranda case.
Yes.
So that's another cool part of that museum. And there is part of the Phoenix jail. They found that a lot of places that had adobe buildings, that they weren't very good as jails.
Right.
The guy could just pick his way out overnight. And so what they eventually did is kind of, instead of putting you inside the jail, they put the jail outside of you. They just chain you to a big old rock. And they've got that rock with a chain on it. That was like basically the original Phoenix jail. I also was standing in front of a smoke jumper's uniform. That's a very early smoke jumper's uniform from Missoula, Montana. And they have a wildland firefighting museum up there.
They also have the training, smoke jumpers training center up there.
And that's a specimen of that early.
Wow.
So anyway, this is where I'm going to leave you. You're welcome to wander around and chat a bit more about the exhibits here. But I really have enjoyed getting to spend some time with you, Loren, and come back anytime.
Hey, Mark, I really appreciate the time that you've spent with us, and the information that you have is just phenomenal. And like you said, I'm sure we just scratched the surface.
We really did. So you can come back for round 2 sometime.
I might have to do that.
All right.
But the cost to get into the museum is like $10 a piece.
$10 for adults, $8 for seniors 62 and older, $8 for kids 6 to 17. I believe it's $4 for kids 3 to 5, and for kids younger than 3, it's free, baby.
Well, that's cool. So it's reasonable to come here. There's more than enough to see. You can we've easily spent 2 hours talking here.
We didn't.
So it's a place this person could spend some time. It's not hard to get to. You got a nice parking lot.
Right.
And this is just an awesome museum. Lots to see. Wonderful people here. We were greeted very nicely. And you've got your YouTube channel at Hall of Flame that has all of these different videos.
You can also see most of those videos on our website, which is hallofflame.org.
hallofflame.org. I was going to ask you about your website. So you can go there. They've got a great website. That's how I contacted Mark here, was through the website.
And we really appreciate if people subscribe to our YouTube channel. We really would like to get that subscriber count up.
Definitely, and that's you know, it's a great thing. Do subscribe. I did the other day.
Thank you, sir.
When I signed up, or when I went to it and I looked, and I'm going, I need to spend more time on this channel, just for the education. And then
stop back in often, because we're always trying to add new stuff. So.
Well, that would be great. Well, again, I really appreciate your time, and like I say, the world is full of wonders. You need to get out and explore.
That has been my experience, Loren.
And everybody have an absolutely wonder-filled day.
Haul the roll and go, where am I to go? Meet Johnny, where am I to go? For I'm a young and a sailor lad, and where am I to go?